Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is on a surprisingly profound framework from the source material. It really redefines how we understand success and failure in intimate relationships. Basically, the framework introduces these two critical dials, honesty and openness. And the material asserts that, those catastrophic relationship failures we often chalk up to being too honest, they're actually, it argues, a result of poor management of openness. So, just to clarify, honesty here is defined really strictly as the accuracy of what you share, like the fundamental commitment to never lying. Openness, on the other hand, is just the volume, how much of your inner world, your thoughts, feelings, past, whatever, how much you choose to reveal. And the core idea, the mandate from this is keep that honesty dial cranked up near 100%, treat it as non-negotiable.
Maybe defaulting around, say, 50%. So the central question we are exploring today is this. Is this goal of 100% honesty a necessary and, frankly, achievable foundation for healthy relationships? Or does the required intentional limiting of openness inherently compromise the possibility, maybe even the utility, of that absolute accuracy? I'm going to argue today that limited openness is actually the pragmatic mechanism that protects our ability to maintain 100% honesty.
Right. Okay, I see why you structure it that way, and I absolutely recognize the insight in separating those two concepts. It's a useful distinction, but I come at it from a different angle. While the distinction between honesty and openness is, intellectually robust, I really have to challenge the feasibility of claiming 100% honesty when the material itself insists that a relationship survival hinges on the, strategic withholding of true information. I believe that this necessary negotiated non-disclosure inherently blurs the line between functional restraint and fidelity to absolute truth. For me, that 100% honesty becomes kind of an idealized and ultimately functionally unsustainable myth.
Well, the necessity of this framework, and specifically the necessity of that 100% accuracy mandate, it's grounded in some deep relational truth, I think. Honesty, understood as just the absence of deception, must be non-negotiable. The source material hints at something fundamental here, maybe linking lying to evolutionary imperatives. Lying is corrosive because it fundamentally breaks the social contract, right? It forces our partners to expend enormous cognitive energy just trying to track our inconsistencies, and that threatens the very foundation of trust essential for, cooperation, even survival perhaps. If we're sort of built to avoid that profound sense of betrayal, then maintaining 100% accuracy in our communications feels like the non-negotiable floor. And look, we have the author's own experience as pretty powerful evidence here. Their first marriage didn't fail because they were truthful, per se. It failed because they attempted what they called radical openness, trying to share every single thought, which predictably became toxic, overwhelming, and just unsustainable. And that radical oversharing, interestingly, eventually created so much pressure and trauma that it led to deception. So the failure wasn't honesty itself, but volume, a failure to negotiate openness, and that failure in managing volume destroyed the foundation of truth. By limiting openness, say agreeing not to share graphic, kind of irrelevant details of past encounters, we aren't sacrificing truth. We're implementing a practical filter that allows us to afford to maintain full accuracy regarding our present core relational commitments.
That's a compelling argument, framing limited openness as a sort of preemptive measure to prevent the need to lie down the road. And I do acknowledge the utility of that distinction for, framing conflict. It helps. However, the source material contains this critical tension that concerns me most. It's the admission that, and I quote loosely here, total mind reading would destroy any relationship. And conversely, no relationship can survive full transparency. Now, if those statements are true, and I kind of suspect they are, then the individual must, by definition, intentionally conceal, filter, and omit significant portions of their inner world for the relationship to survive. So, my issue is really with the semantic absolute, the 100%. If the relationship is predicated on an active decision to adjust the openness dial, meaning actively deciding not to communicate a true thought or a desire or feeling that you genuinely possess, precisely because revealing it would cause unacceptable damage, How can you simultaneously claim 100% accuracy regarding your full psychological state, your current reality? The stability of the relationship survives precisely because of a negotiated omission, a deliberate blind spot. Calling that framework 100% honest seems, well, it seems to misrepresent the complex reality inherent in that kind of mutual protective nondisclosure.
Yeah, I think, though, you might be conflating the state of one's inner world with the state of one's communication fidelity. In this framework, honesty is really presented as a binary condition. You either actively engage in deception or you do not. The commitment is entirely to the accuracy of what is shared. So, if I withhold an irrelevant stray thought about, I don't know, an old crush, I am engaging in information management. That's adjusting the openness style. But if I am asked directly about the state of my commitment and I lie, then I have failed the 100% honesty test. The whole point is that limiting openness reduces the pressure and the expectation of full transparency, which in turn protects the core commitment to never actively deceive. Openness in this view serves honesty. It makes it possible.
Okay, I concede that the line between management and manipulation is definitely where the tension lies, but I'm just not sure I buy that the integrity of the 100% dial remains untouched by intentional omission. Let's take your example further. If my partner asks me, "Is everything okay? Are you, fully present in this relationship?" and I say, "Yes, absolutely," while I am actively suppressing a severe and very true anxiety about our financial future that I haven't disclosed because maybe we agreed to limit openness on that specific stressful topic. Well, I've technically avoided an outright lie, maybe, but have I really been 100% accurate regarding my relational reality in that moment? I don't think so. The necessary negotiation of openness, like agreeing that we don't need gory details about each other's casual past, means certain true information is intentionally closed off. If I hold a true thought or detail that I know would cause my partner pain or insecurity, and I actively withhold it, I am, by definition, sacrificing the comprehensive truth, the 100% accuracy of my present reality, for the sake of relational safety. Isn't an agreement to omit information fundamentally an agreement not to pursue certain truths, even when those truths exist right there in the mind of the partner? The relationship is then stable, yes, but it feels like it's stable on mutually accepted partial ignorance, not full honesty.
But the framework accounts for exactly this complexity, doesn't it? By forcing us to distinguish between essential truths and destructive truths. We have concrete examples from the source that validate the need for robust filtering. The source cites the difference between, like, a stranger oversharing deeply personal tragedies in public or a partner oversharing graphic sexual details from their past. These are truthful statements, yes, nobody's denying that, but they're described as potentially repulsive or destructive because they serve no productive purpose in the current context and instead just overload the recipient. And that's why the dial analogy works so well, I think. It provides a functional mechanism to filter out these specific, destructive, and often irrelevant truths without resorting to deception on core present-day relational commitments like you mentioned financial planning or commitment levels or health issues. The commitment isn't to 100% transparency of mind, that's impossible, probably toxic, as the source implies. It's 100% fidelity to the information you do choose to share. The real danger lies in confusing that radical openness, which failed the author, with the functional, healthy requirement of simply never lying. The boundary, the filter, protects the core truth from being drowned out by noise.
I agree that filtering is essential, obviously, but who gets to determine what is destructive noise versus essential truth? That feels subjective, doesn't it? If a partner has to constantly filter true stray thoughts or desires, which, as the source itself notes, is necessary because, quote, nobody can handle hearing every stray thought, then that individual is constantly engaged in a kind of truthful self-censorship. And think about this, like the daily psychological cost of that. If I intentionally withhold a true fleeting attraction to, I don't know, a celebrity, or a true momentary doubt about a future plan we made, simply to preserve the relationship, I am prioritizing relational equilibrium over absolute accuracy. I'm actively managing the truth input. So I'd suggest the two dials are not truly independent. Not really.
Limiting openness inevitably places a significant strain on the integrity of that 100% honesty claim. It makes it, at best, an idealized behavioral limit. A goal, maybe, rather than a genuine operating foundation for comprehensive truth in the relationship.
That's a powerful challenge, I grant you, but I think you're defining 100% honesty in a way that the framework specifically tries to avoid, which is equating it with 100% transparency. If my commitment is simply to never lie, I am committed to accuracy in what I convey. If I manage the flow of irrelevant or purely internal information, that's just being prudent. It's relationship management. The framework's practical guidance actually calls for negotiating openness and setting a comfortable level, explicitly acknowledging that levels will vary dramatically between relationships. That's key. Even the suggested default setting of like 50% for openness demonstrates necessary caution. It recognizes that oversharing too soon is often irreversible, damaging. This structure aims to manage complexity not by accepting deception, but by limiting the scope of what is expected to be shared.
The non-negotiable foundation has to remain the commitment to never lie. Because, as we discussed earlier, that's what fundamentally erodes trust and cooperation. If I fail to volunteer an unimportant detail about, what I had for breakfast, that's just information management. Fine. But if I intentionally misrepresent the severity of a chronic health issue, that is a lie. And the framework correctly flags that as a non-negotiable failure.
Okay, but the relationship's biggest challenges rarely center on breakfast details, do they? They hinge on high-stakes emotional information, the very type of information that is most likely to be filtered out under the guise of limiting openness for protection. So I'd argue that defining honesty as 100% kind of loses its functional utility if the relationship's actual health relies primarily on the strategic, negotiated avoidance of precisely those challenging but true pieces of information. If the bond hinges on what partners agree not to ask, or maybe more subtly, what they mutually agree not to reveal, creating those mutually acceptable blind spots you mentioned, then the foundation isn't really based on absolute truth, is it? It feels more like it's based on selective vulnerability, carefully curated truth. And the intellectual complexity here is, I think, profound. Is relational trust truly built on maximizing accuracy, as you suggest? Or is it actually built on maximizing emotional safety through careful regulation and sometimes, yes, omission of elements of the truth that would otherwise be destructive? If we are only 100% honest about the truths we agree are safe to discuss, then we're operating with a kind of conditional truth, not an absolute one.
And I maintain that the core strength of this framework is providing that necessary conceptual separation. We have to be rigorous, I think, in distinguishing honesty as absolute accuracy, the commitment to never engaging in explicit deception, from openness, which is essentially just a volume control for vulnerability. To conflate them, which I feel is what happens if we insist 100% honesty requires 100% openness, means that the justifiable fear of radical openness will always undermine the essential and non-negotiable commitment to simply never lying. The dial analogy protects the possibility of maintaining 100% accuracy on core matters precisely by giving us the necessary tool, the vocabulary even, to manage the otherwise overwhelming reality of being constantly bombarded with every single piece of data floating around in our partner's mind.
I agree that the framework provides an incredibly insightful structure for diagnosing conflict, absolutely. But the source material's own conclusion, that stark statement that no relationship can survive full transparency, ultimately, for me, demonstrates that 100% honesty, in the sense of full revelation, is an unsustainable ideal. Intimacy relies on protective boundaries, on necessary silences, and on agreed-upon areas of non-inquiry. And these necessary silences mean that while we must strive for accuracy and truthful communication, which is vital, we cannot genuinely claim absolute 100% revelation of our inner reality without, potentially, destroying the very bond we seek to protect. The framework, perhaps unintentionally, forces us to accept that relationship health requires some sort of compromise on the absolute completeness of truth.
And that illuminates exactly why engaging with this material is so valuable, I think. Because understanding the interplay, that tension between these two dials, gives us a much deeper understanding of relationship dynamics than just, judging people crudely as too honest or not honest enough. We gain the language to articulate the difference between someone who is actively deceiving and someone who is simply managing the information load responsibly, perhaps even necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah. It forces us to really wrestle with what constitutes a functional truth versus a harmful one within an intimate context, and maybe to recognize that the commitment to honesty is perhaps less about achieving some kind of impossible, static, absolute, and more about a continuous, dynamic commitment to accuracy and communication within boundaries that protect the relationship itself. It's complicated.